Take a deep breath and transport your mind to a cold, somber courtroom in Staffordshire, England, in April 1880. The room is a stark contrast between the gravity of Victorian law and the sheer desperation of humanity. Standing huddled in the dock is a boy. He is certainly not a grown man, nor is he an organized criminal. This is Harry Alco, 15 years old, but his small, frail frame makes him look closer to 12.
And here is the cruelest truth. He barely comprehends the proceedings happening around him. Harry was profoundly deaf and almost completely mute. Worse still, official court records described him with the harshest term of the era, a complete idiot. This phrase, in 19th century language, was both a medical designation and a tacit social condemnation. Harry's crime? Breaking into a residential house to steal candles. A few candles. Facing this charge, the judge handed down a sentence that would crush anyone's life. 5 years penal servitude. This was not local jail. This was the harshest system designed to break the will of hardened, dangerous, adult criminals. Hello, we're excited to show you our native speech capabilities. How could a deaf, socially rejected teenager be handed such a heavy sentence just for a petty item? This is a story of systemic failure, a stain on judicial history, and the quest to find Harry Alcock before he became a prisoner number. We are about to uncover his untold story. Our journey begins in the cold winter of 1865 in Ladage, Staffordshire, England. The birth certificate shows Harry Alcock was born into a typical English working-class family. His father, William, was a journeyman brickmaker. This term is important. It indicates William was a skilled artisan but did not own property or the brickyard. His work was extremely arduous, digging clay in the winter and firing bricks in the harsh heat of summer. His income was precarious, tied to the brick production cycle. His mother, Hannah, signed the birth certificate with a simple X instead of a signature. This detail, though small, clearly paints Harry's world. A world where poverty meant a fundamental lack of basic knowledge. Literacy was a privilege, not a right. By 1871, the family had moved to Compton. The census record lists 6-year-old Harry's occupation as scholar. At first glance, this is encouraging, as the Education Act of 1870 had just passed. However, we must not be misled. For many working-class families, scholar was merely an administrative box for children over 5 not yet working. For Harry, a profoundly deaf boy in a poor family with no special resources, the door to a regular school was virtually closed. Access to sign language or specialized education was unthinkable. He was thrust into a state of communication isolation within his own family and community.
This was the perfect condition for trouble to brew. In this context of isolation and lack of education, Harry began to stray. But trouble started early, not out of malice, but desperation. In 1875, at just 10 years old, he was charged with stealing cheap jewelry. The case was dropped. It is highly likely the victim withdrew the charge out of pity for a small, disabled boy. But the police did not let it go. Their records noted that he had been wandering the streets, begging and pilfering. The boy was a problem the community had no tools to solve. 2 years later, things escalated. In 1877, 12-year-old Harry was sentenced to 1 month in jail plus 5 years at a reformatory school. Reformatories were designed to discipline and educate young offenders. They were a step down from adult prison, but it was here that the system failed miserably and officially. The reformatory authorities refused to accept Harry due to his defects. We need to understand why. reformatories operated on strict conformity, military drills, and, crucially, shouted commands. They had no tool, no sign language instructor, or procedure to handle a deaf boy. They relied on fear and noise. Harry's deafness made him useless, even disruptive in this environment. And so, after a month locked up in an adult prison, he was simply released back onto the streets of Leek. No school, no support, no refuge. He was returned to the life he had already failed at. His father, William's desperation, also became clear during this period. He confessed to the court that he was very glad the boy was going and that he could no longer manage him. It was the confession of a father crushed by circumstances. Harry became an unmanageable presence to the local police. He was repeatedly arrested and released on bail. The pinnacle of this failure came at the Quarter Sessions Court in 1878, when Harry was charged with stealing £2. The chairman publicly called him a complete idiot and admitted the authorities' total helplessness. They had written to the Home Secretary, trying to find any institution that would take him, but all had refused. The magistrate concluded the boy was not a fit object for any place. When the jury acquitted him, perhaps out of sheer confusion, the magistrate could only tell the father, "Just take him home." But William responded with the heartbreaking statement, he felt much more comfortable when Harry was locked up. The isolation and inability to communicate drove Harry to seek stimulation and reaction in unconventional ways. From stealing things of no value, like club notices and vaccination papers, to persistent breaking and entering. He was a ticking bomb. The cycle culminated in that dreadful moment in April 1880, the final crime, breaking and entering Elizabeth Wormsley's house and stealing candles. The prosecutor called Harry incorrigible, and the desperate father, William, could only plead with the judge to send his son somewhere he would be looked after. He was no longer pleading for freedom. He was pleading for safety. The judge's response was a terrible distortion of reality. Acknowledging that no reformatory would take the deaf boy, the judge declared that in the penal servitude system, Harry would receive care and education. 5 years penal servitude. This was a horrific and cruel rationalization. Penal servitude was designed to crush adult men with hard labor, humiliation, and most importantly, silence. To send a disabled 15-year-old boy there for care was a psychological death sentence. Harry was sent to H&P Pentonville, the notorious prison famous for the separate system. The theory was that total isolation would force the inmate to repent. Prisoners were locked away 23 hours a day. When moved, they wore hooded peaked masks, forbidden to see or recognize anyone. For an ordinary prisoner, this silence was already oppressive. For Harry, the deaf boy, this silence must have been a complete, terrifying sensory deprivation. Harry could not hear the bells that regulated every moment of prison life. He could not hear the warden's footsteps. He was thrust into a world with no signals, no explanation. He could not learn the simplest rules. Harry's prison crime record is a long and painful catalog of rebellion. Spitting at officers, throwing bread, damaging bedding, tearing library books, smashing cell windows, hitting gas lamps with a stool, and concealing waste. Every single one of these acts was not a sign of criminality, but the silent scream of a boy desperately seeking interaction, a reaction, any sensory input to break the isolation. He couldn't hear. He had to create an event for the world to acknowledge his existence. The system didn't reform him. It only drove him to a frenzy. Harry was released early in May 1884, at the age of 20. The Pentonville experience did not reform him. It made him harder to reintegrate. Just 1 year later, he was in trouble again, charged with wandering, having no visible means of subsistence. He was subsequently sentenced to another 9 months of hard labor. But then, a notable silence descends on the crime records. We find the reason in the 1891 census. Harry had returned home, living with his parents, and the miraculous had happened. His occupation was now brickmaker. The father, William, who had once begged the court to lock up his son out of utter powerlessness, did the extraordinary. He took Harry back and taught him the family trade. While the state could find no place for Harry, the father created one for him in the world of work. For Harry, this apprenticeship was a perfect communication, as it relied on observation, feel, and manual labor, requiring no speech. This is a testament to the resilience of the family spirit, which the authorities had completely discounted. This protection, however, did not last. In 1900, William passed away. In the 1901 census, Harry, without his father's protection, had lost the trade. He was listed as a casual farm laborer, and once again, the official record labeled him a deaf and dumb imbecile in the infirmity column. The absence of his father immediately pulled Harry back down to the bottom of the social ladder. Our last sighting of Harry is in the 1911 census. Harry, now around 46, was living in a crowded house on London Street, Leek, with his lover, uncle, and brothers. And one final, crucial detail is revealed. Harry's brother George and his uncle Ralph were also recorded as partially deaf. The hearing impairment likely ran in the maternal line. This created an unspoken network of understanding within the family that no state institution could replicate. It was this extended family network, and not any state or charitable institution, that kept Harry from the ultimate destitution of the workhouse, where millions of the Victorian poor ended their lives. The story of Harry Alco is a powerful case study in the catastrophic failure of Victorian society to understand or support difference. When the system tried and failed to categorize this deaf boy into a reformatory school, it defaulted him to the only remaining box, a dangerous criminal. That Harry survived the isolation of Pentonville is extraordinary. He found his way back home, learned his father's trade, and was ultimately protected by the very family the authorities had condemned. His story disappears after 1911. What was the most tragic failure in Harry's life? Was it the court that sentenced him, turning a disabled teen into a penal convict? Was it the institutions that refused to accept him because they were unwilling to change their rules? Or was it Pentonville Prison, which sought to crush his will to live? This is a stark reminder that sometimes the love and understanding of one father, of one family, is more powerful than the entire judicial machinery of an empire. What do you think was the most tragic failure in Harry's life? Was it the court, the institutions, or the prison? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We thank you for watching.